Should only be used for one season, not designed for prolonged use. Basically, I know there's a lot of home sites out there right now that, you know, didn't get developed or were in the development phase and all of a sudden they died. So make sure that if you get started on those sites again, that if the silt fence was there when you started 2 years ago, it's time for a new one. And make sure also, because I see a lot of this too, when you leave that site, make sure when that house is done and it's selling time, make sure you remove that silt fence. Even if it's in a wooded area where nobody sees it, make sure you remove it. Because like I said, I've been walking through the woods a lot of times and there's a silt fence hanging out in the woods. You're gonna like, why is this out here? So make sure you remove that when you leave. Placement of silt fences. Sheet and reel erosion would occur basically that's the ideal effect you want. You want that sheet and reel to be caught. You don't want any real concentrated flow. You don't want to put silt fences in a concentrated flow path. Protection of adjacent properties and areas beyond limits of grading is needed. Make sure you have perimeter control. The size of the drainage area is no more than 1/4 acre per 100 linear feet of silt fence. That's a good idea to keep in mind. 0.25 acres per 100 linear feet. The maximum flow path length above the barrier is 100 feet. So if you've got a slope that's 100 feet straight up, that's not going to apply here. That's basically, you know, a pretty flat 100 feet. You know, it's kind of one of those things where you don't want to go too far and you don't want to make sure that that silt fence is at the toe of a slope. That might be a good implication of putting the hay bales or something like that as your secondary erosion control measure. The maximum slope gradient above the barriers is 2 to 1. So keep that in mind. Small swells are carrying silt. The slope is less than 2% and the drainage area is less than 2 acres. So make sure that those design criteria are met. No practice other than a silt fence is feasible. So if silt fence is the only thing that you think could go there, that's where your silt fence would be a good idea for you. You know, if silt fence is not, these design standards can be met, there's no point in putting a silt fence there. So just make sure you keep that in mind. This is kind of a good diagram for the silt fence. It's in that, I think it's in that Missouri handout we gave you about silt fences. A lot of times you can actually put a trench right here if you need some extra capacity. Just make sure you compact this in, but you can put a trench right in here to catch a little bit more if that's what you want to do. Because sometimes, you know, if you don't want to maintain it as much, you can put a trench right there to catch it. So just make sure you keep that in mind. This is the wire backing fence, much stronger fence. I was talking to one of the vendors yesterday, and basically, if you have to put the silt fence up twice, this one right here, it pays for itself. So just keep that in mind. And it also normally has a much longer lifespan than does the other. Reason for silt fence failures: improper placement on the site, allowing excessive drainage area to the silt fence structure. Make sure your water's not flowing. Too hard, shallow trenches with little or no soil compaction. Make sure your silt fence is embedded in like it needs to be. Inadequate attachment to posts. If it's on a slope, it needs to have some kind of post attachment, or also it needs to be the wooden post or the wire mesh post needs to be firmly attached to the silt fence. The silt fence doesn't need to sag, because that totally defeats the purpose. Failure to maintain the silt fence after installation. Installing silt fence along property boundaries, producing concentrated runoff. And what that's talking about is if you had a slope property, don't put the silt fence along the slope, because it's going to run right down that slope and then it's going to stop at the property edge, and all the sediment's going to build up in that one little property edge wherever the lowest corner. These are kind of pictures of improper silt fences. Like I said, you see the gaps here. You see it kind of getting out in the street here. This one, I don't know what they're doing. There's also, like I said, kind of a picture of a silt fence that obviously hadn't been maintained. These wooden posts on these silt fences, these cheaper silt fences, are basically don't need to be 10 feet apart, more than 10 feet apart, but they also if you've got a pretty strong flow coming down through here, they're not going to last long. I mean, you basically just got it tied to a wooden post. It's not going to last a very long time. There's really no enforcement there. If you see this one's kind of got, see the trenching effect down here. You probably want to compact that a little bit more just to make sure it's compacted. They're going to show you an example out here. We got some people to install some silt fences for you to kind of show you exactly how they need to be in. But just make sure they're trenched in. Construction exit pads should be located for maximum use by construction vehicles. If the soil cannot support gravel, a layer of geotextile may be required to keep rock from sinking into the soil. If you're in a wet area, make sure you put some type of geotextile down. It's a good rule of thumb. It's not going to cost you a lot of money. It will end up costing you a lot more not to put this geotextile down and then have to keep adding rock. So make sure you make that geotextile layer is there. If constructed in a sensitive area, a washing pad may be required. If you're in a wetland area or near blue line or something like that, you probably want to come to either JCDH or one of the regulatory authorities like Unincorporated, Bessemer, or Birmingham and talk with us about it. You know, we'll be more than happy to talk with you about anything that's constructed in kind of a sensitive area. These are construction exit pads. That's kind of the design criteria that's in the ADM book. This is kind of a cross section you see, 6-inch minimum of gravel has to be on that thing, and a paved surface is not considered a construction exit pad. So you can't use that paved surface as a construction exit pad until all sediment is stabilized. So there's your kind of an improper construction pad. You see there's another one. See how there's really no sediment trap in there at all. It just kind of becomes a nasty mess. This one's a little bit better. This one's probably a newer developed subdivision, looks like. You see, I mean, there's some soil that leaves it, not a lot. You know, you probably want to stop it short of these drains as well, because if you put it in that drain, it's going to stop up all your water up here and probably create a mud hole and a mess right there. Inlet protection. You see kind of right here what will happen to an inlet real quick. This costs the city, it costs the developer, it costs everybody a ton of money, because your piping network's probably a fourth of the way full if you have bad inlet protection. When somebody sells that to a homeowner, that homeowner then is given a system that's already compromised. So we want to make sure that's not happening. Improper inlet protection can lead to expensive stormwater pipe cleanup as well as a fine for any developer involved. Type 1 inlet protection, this is ADM's standards. It's mostly used in non-traffic areas. You probably wouldn't want this big gravel pile out in the middle of the road. This is an inlet protection. You see how they've got kind of built up here, making sure that inlet is protected properly. You know, now, like I said, most of the drainage water is going away from this one, so they didn't have to have it too high. You probably want it a little higher if it was something that was in the flow path and the water was more there. These are some more. You can use some sandbags or other approvable control device on curb or sag inlets. These are probably the ones you see the most. Either a built-up inlet. You know, a lot of people have a tendency to use straw here, and you can use straw, but like I said, you got to make sure you have silt fence behind it. You know, you also have a drop where it has to get up to a certain point before it will reach the inlet. Or you have this. You see a lot of these with the silt fences on 4 corners. Just make sure if you do this, you support this with wire mesh, because otherwise it'll fall in on itself. There's an inlet protection, you know, with the bags. You can use those. It's kind of a plastic material. It's real. Like, I'd never seen one of those before we went out there. Trash disposal. A trash receptacle should be on site once work has begun. There shouldn't be a lot of trash around. There shouldn't be debris blowing off your site. There shouldn't be a burn pile. So make sure those things are not on your construction sites.